Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join this webinar. I hope that you and your families are doing well in this unprecedented time. My name is Jeff Dudley, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. I am a member of the Solomon Reliability and Maintenance team, the RAM team. Welcome to the Solomon webinar, Guidance in a Time of Uncertainty. Today, we want to share thoughts on how to navigate through these unusual times. Our purpose is to share how you can reduce spending without simply cutting costs and maintain a focus on your reliability journey. We will be hearing from members of the Solomon RAM team. All of us combined have over 170 years of both operations and RAM experience in refining and the petrochemical industries, and have been responsible for operating facilities in very diverse economic times. Our presenters are Kevin McQuillan, 30 years of experience with international assignments, holding senior management roles in the petrochemical and refining industry. Ron Landry, 30 years of experience with international assignments, holding director roles in the petrochemical industry. Answering questions will be Ed Winston, 35 years of experience holding VP and director roles in refining, petrochemical, and utilities industry, and Clint Chappell, 30 years of experience holding VP and director roles in petrochemical, refining, and industrial gas sector of the industry. During today's seminar, Kevin will focus on the effectiveness of operations, the optimization of work activities. Ron will focus on the efficiency of operations, the cost and resource management. As I mentioned, Clint and Ed will be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. If you have questions throughout the webinar, you can submit them on the chat function found at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions and we will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. In today's presentation, along with introducing topics, I will provide a quick review of what we have learned. Today, I'm going to ask you to approach this webinar differently. It is a unique opportunity for you to learn, but what I would ask you to do is think of 2 or 3 people who have not been able to join the webinar and learn something that you can share with them, because learning and then sharing is what leaders do. Today, the big issue on everybody's mind is, we know that most of you have been asked to increase profits, but have been asked to also either cut spending or simply just cut cost. We know that cost-cutting pressure and cost-cutting focus is a real situation. We've all lived through it multiple times. So that the big question is, how can you cut spending without losing reliability and negatively impacting your mechanical availability? The good news is that it can be done if done correctly. The bad news is that if it is done incorrectly, it can have long-lasting and significant negative effects. The image you are looking at is the Solomon view of effectiveness, mechanical availability, and efficiency, maintenance cost. The goal of all operators is to have high mechanical availability and low cost. However, what 25 plus years of Solomon reliability and maintenance benchmarking data says is there is only one sustainable approach to achieving that level of performance. There is also a very unsustainable one. The sustainable path involves taking proactive actions such as targeted spending and reliability-centered behaviors, such as doing the right type of work at the right time to improve mechanical availability and as a result, reduce spending. The data tells us this is the only successful approach. Simply and arbitrarily cutting costs for the sake of lowering spending is a very dangerous proposition. Again, the data says that based on our 25 years of data, that not one of our clients has ever been able to just simply cut costs and maintain their mechanical availability. It can happen for a very short time, but inevitably they lose mechanical availability and ultimately lose profits, something I'm sure none of us want to have. During today's webinar, we're going to be using some Solomon terminology. So let me share with you what those items are. In the RAM study, we use the term RAM effectiveness index, excuse me. It is a measure of the results of a monetized view of your downtime plus the money you spent during the study year, which is typically a calendar year. Both of these monetized values are then divided by your plant replacement value, your PRV. RAM-EI is then reported as a percentage of the plant replacement value. The lower the RAM-EI, the better the performance. In the chart you're looking at, and in many of the charts you will see during the presentation, the performance is broken into quartiles. In this example, you are looking at the quartiles of RAM-EI. So it is actually the value of lost production plus your total maintenance cost. The bars of the quartile averages, with Q1 being the best performance because it is the least production loss and the lowest average cost. Q1 does not mean that all metrics are at Q1. There are metrics for Q1 performers that are not. Those are the opportunities for improvement. The top of each quartile bar is the average of the performance of the quartile. Interestingly, the difference between Q1 performance in RAM-EI and Q4 performance in RAM-EI is actually 8% of the PRV. So you can see the significance in the value of reliability. But one very important note, Q1 performers are the lowest average cost. They are not the lowest overall cost. The data shows us that Q2, Q3, Q4 performers are often the lowest cost performers, but as a result, their mechanical availability is dramatically and negatively impacted. So people with the lowest cost typically can actually be as low as Q4 performers. Also, we know that the highest mechanical availability performers do not always have Q1 RAM-EI. Oftentimes, those performers who strive to have the highest mechanical availability are either have a reactive culture, or they are very, very unable to take risks, and so they're risk adverse. Q1 performers focus on providing the optimum mechanical availability, so they deliver what their customers desire and also are able to deliver any upside, but they do all of that at an optimum cost. In order to deliver RAM and maintenance objectives, a maintenance strategy is needed. The strategy is made up of both methods and practices that deliver effectiveness and efficiency. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and he will talk to you much more about effectiveness.
Hey, thank you, Jeff, and hello, everybody. I hope you're all safe and well. My name's Kevin. I live and work in Bahrain, and I joined Solomon 5 years ago as a reliability and maintenance consultant. I spend most of my time working with the reliability and maintenance benchmark study that Jeff explained, and I'm going to show you some more detailed data from that study in this seminar. Solomon consultants are in a privileged position. We work with large and small manufacturing organizations, and we get to use data to understand how their performance compares. Perhaps more importantly, we also learn about the things that they do that correlate to performance, either good or bad, and that teaches us a lot of lessons, and I'm pleased to be able to share some of those lessons with you today, with a focus on the current situation. The first lesson is that reliability is the answer to world-class, it says RAM performance, but I'd go even further and say world-class manufacturing performance. Reliability takes time, it takes commitment to achieve, and it can't typically be turned on or off. And it is characterized by what organizations do, not what they say they do. When we work with highly reliable organizations, we see that they focus on defect elimination, they focus on education for their workers, and they have broad support vertically and horizontally within the organization for the reliability targets they set. They truly embrace the concept of failure-free operation, and they try where possible to avoid rewarding crisis management. So I'm going to talk about work effectiveness, and in this context, I'm describing the extent to which the work undertaken has the desired impact on the availability and reliability of the asset. It's about doing the right work at the right specification. And the desired impact should be any one of the things listed there, either improving the reliability of the asset, restoring the asset to its required function, controlling the potential risk of future failure, or in the particular case of inspection, ensuring that information is provided that allows future decision-making to be taken. Our second learning in Solomon is that reliability is not just about the assets, it's also about people and it's about culture. In high-performing organizations, everybody feels an ownership of reliability in the same way that in most of the industry, everybody feels a personal ownership for safety. And reliability is not just about the asset, it's about the things that everybody does in their day-to-day work. Organizations provide a direct message from the leadership on the importance of reliability, and they encourage a find small, fix small culture where major problems are avoided rather than resolved. Now, these things, as I've already said, take time, but perhaps now is a good time to reassess your goals, accountabilities, culture, and leadership, and ensure that the fundamentals are in place and followed. One lesson I've learned in Solomon is that if you let your decisions be informed by data, you've actually got a better chance of making good decisions. And this rather colourful slide illustrates the importance of leadership and culture to overall performance. The slide shows 7 large companies, each of which has at least 6 similar plants in one of our studies, and the y-axis shows mechanical availability losses. The grey bars show the range of performance within each of the companies. The top of the bar corresponds to their worst performing plant and the bottom of the bar to their best performing plant. Now, you'll see straight away that the performance within the companies typically varies quite significantly. And given that the plants concerned are designed and built to similar standards, and then operated and maintained to corporate procedures, the conclusion that we draw is that the missing driver for performance is people, leadership, and culture. And you can see quite clearly that wide range of performance within each of these companies. If you focus for a moment on companies 2 and 4, you'll see company 2 has a plant that is performing amongst the very best in the study, whereas its worst performing plant is well into quartile 4, indicated by the red colour. Unlike company 2, company C4 has achieved consistent performance, but is consistently average. And you might imagine that that company has a very strong management culture, but is unable to move out of the box and drive to real excellence. Now, you can consider that both companies C2 and C4 have significant scope for improvement, but it's clear from the data that the things that they need to do will be very different from each other. The next slide is data from the reliability and maintenance study, and this slide is particularly relevant to the current situation. On the left-hand side, I'm showing work hours by quartiles of RAM effectiveness, and you can see that the better performers work fewer than half the total work hours compared to the performers in quartile 4. On the right-hand side, we're showing the distribution of the work hours by percentage, where red is emergency corrective maintenance, green is non-emergency corrective maintenance, and blue is proactive maintenance, where this is any combination of preventive, predictive, reliability improvement, or end-of-life replacement. There are two significant findings in this data. It's clear that the better performers work fewer hours, but they're doing proportionally less corrective maintenance and more proactive maintenance. That said, the differences in proportions are not significant. There are two driving factors that we need to understand in order to make sense of the data. And the first is that corrective maintenance is directly a function of reliability. Better performers have better reliability, and therefore they need to do less corrective maintenance. On the other hand, if we look at proactive maintenance, the data is perhaps a little bit surprising in that it shows that the better performers are actually doing less total proactive maintenance than other organizations. And the reason for this is that their choices are able to be made in a way that actually optimizes the proactive maintenance they do against the parameters that I described a couple of slides ago. Poorer performers actually do more proactive maintenance in terms of work hours, but they're not getting the value from it that they could get. Now, whilst Jeff has already said that we would not encourage arbitrary cost cutting, it is clear from this data that for most companies, if they undertake a structured and thorough review of their proactive maintenance to ensure that each and every task is adding value, there is potential to refine, change intervals, eliminate some of these tasks without actually compromising the reliability of the asset. As a final comment on this slide, cost cutting in itself does not improve reliability, and so it has a disproportionate effect on proactive maintenance. Given this, our recommendation is that companies review the effectiveness of the proactive maintenance that they choose to do. The next slide will be discussed in more detail a little bit later. It shows for corrective maintenance only the variation between performance quartiles in the extent to which corrective maintenance is planned, scheduled, and then delivered as per schedule. I'd like to make just one remark on this slide, and that is that the data shows quite clearly that the better performing organizations take the time to plan and schedule the work they do, and so deliver it safely and in accordance with specification. It's perhaps best illustrated by example. In a high-performing company, when a pump seal leaks, the work is prepared and undertaken the following week. In the meantime, the company is confident in the reliability of the spare pump. In a quartile 4 organization, when a pump seal leaks, everybody rushes to fix the pump as quickly as possible because nobody's really sure how long the spare will last. And in consequence, the standards to which the repair is done are perhaps not as good as they could be. And you can see how this leads to a cycle of reduced reliability over time in these organizations. The next slide looks at maintenance cost as a percentage of plant replacement value. And it perhaps isn't surprising to see that maintenance costs increased roughly in proportion to work hours. The interesting lesson in all of this is that when Solomon worked with clients on the RAM study, we find that a lot of organizations have great difficulty in telling us how many hours are actually worked on their site, particularly for contractors. Higher performing organizations recognize that the best way to control cost is by controlling work hours, and the only way to control work hours is to make sure that you measure them. Most organizations we work with have great difficulty in doing this, and therefore it's perhaps not surprising that cost control is a difficult challenge for them as well. My final slide looks at the other side of maintenance effectiveness, and that is the results that it delivers in terms of the reliability of the asset. Again, the data is data from the RAM study, and again, we're showing performance in quartiles of overall RAM effectiveness. The data here is showing downtime outside of turnarounds, and it breaks it down into short overhauls in blue, equipment failure in orange, and reduced rate operation due to asset condition in green. And the difference is incredibly striking. In high-performing organizations, they are almost only ever down when they are in turnaround. And this performance is a major differentiator, and it's achieved by organizations that can deliver effective turnarounds, where effectiveness is measured in terms of the subsequent downtime of the asset between the two turnarounds that it undertakes. You'll see that in high performers, they're almost never down outside of turnaround, whereas in quartile 4 performers, despite the fact that they do larger turnarounds, they do not deliver value from these turnarounds in the context of reliability between turnaround events. Poor performers get very good at solving crises. Better performers have no crises to solve. I'll leave you with one final thought, and that is to think about the organization that you're currently part of and to which of these quartiles you most closely correspond and to which of them you would most like to correspond. That's all I want to say. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand over directly to Ron Landry, and Ron will talk about maintenance efficiency.
Thank you, Kevin. I do appreciate that. So if you think about maintenance efficiency and effectiveness, they really are two sides of the same coin, and both of them work very, very well together. When Jeff was talking about his curve, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well in this segment, what I would like for you to do is think of your own performance and think of what you can do differently as we go forward. Also like to take this time to remind you that you can use the chat function on the webinar too. Please don't wait until the end to submit your questions. Go ahead and submit your questions now or as they come up. within the webinar. The other thing I'd like for you to do too is think about what Jeff said, is that if you don't make any changes, then you will not be making any improvements. And with that, I would like to challenge you to make a little bit of an exercise during this webinar and maybe think about 3 different areas to work in. First of all, we're going to talk about the work process discipline. We're going to talk about eliminating waste, and we're going to talk about essentially raising your game, because that's what we're asked to do time and time again. And as everyone knows, in the continuous improvement world, if you don't raise your game, you will be left behind in the industry as well. So as we look at the next slide, within Solomon, with the 25 years of benchmarking data, there are certain terminologies that we do use. And this is also a very good checklist of thinking from an improvement standpoint, where do you focus? If you look at your cost types, you have expense, you have maintenance capital, and that's end of life replacement type of spending. You also have different areas of cost categories, your labor, your materials, your indirects, the work categories such as routine maintenance, and then you have your turnarounds. Also, you have the short overhauls, as Kevin talked about before, and then your different equipment types, your rotating fixed equipment, instrument electrical, your analytical, your process control systems, that sort of thing. So as you look at your improvements, think of these categories in which you can make those improvements. On this next slide, as Jeff showed, you really want to work your way up to be a leader, as they talked about. And again, it's going to sound like everyone's beating the same drum here. You don't want to just go out and slash cost. I can tell you in my experiences, when you go and you work on the right things and you do them the right way, you do get the performance that you need. And if you really get into the availability side of your facility, which that's really the profitability of why we're in business, you will be negatively affecting that side of things. So as we go through these discussions on efficiency and effectiveness, please keep that in mind, and that there's consequences for certain actions that we take as well. Next slide, please. So on the efficiency, how do we define efficiency? It's the extent at which the work is undertaken, delivered safely and to the required specification, and at the optimal cost. Okay, so we all know that if we have tons of folks hanging around and we don't really follow that work process discipline that we talked about as one of the categories that we have, then yes, we can get things done fairly quickly, and we don't really have to worry about, having enough resources to get things done. But we want to do things at the optimal cost. There are certain areas we probably should be thinking about, maybe thinking outside the box. Do you use some of your process technicians or operations folks to help in some of the areas? And it could be as small as expanding the rounds that these folks do to help make sure that they're actually part of the preventive maintenance side of things as well. Have you had the right balance with your contractors? Because as we know, you can bring contractors in to do work. You can actually train your own folks to do certain things, but what's the right balance for you when you look at your overall efficiency, and what do you do? Plus, you need folks that are familiar with your facility. They need to know your technology, and they need to be able to apply their learnings to their daily work as well. And then adhering to the best practices and processes. That when things are working very well, sometimes we talk about it as a Swiss watch, or something that's working very well. It works like an orchestra. It's just a beautiful thing to watch. And we've all been at that point in our career where we saw things working very, very smoothly and very, very efficiently, and we know what it feels like. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how do we actually get there. Next slide, please. So, as Kevin said, if we put safety and reliability in everyone's mind from a responsibility standpoint, then we know it is really working its way throughout the culture of the facilities that we're in. If we think that reliability is the responsibility of the maintenance organization or a reliability organization, then we really don't have the reliability culture really ingrained in our facility and with our folks as well. And again, we talked about raising our game. This is one of those things that, as they say, it does not cost anything to put the right culture in place. It starts with how we approach things. Do we look at it from a teamwork standpoint, or are our goals the same that sort of things as well. It's also a journey. It's not a sprint. So the things that you want to go do and things you want to put in place, you really don't want them to be temporary. You want to build them into what you do, whether it's building them into your CMMS system, whether it's going back a ways and getting your reliability strategies where they need to be, so that the things that you do and the timing in which you do the things that you do are value added. If you don't take the time to make sure that they're value added, if you don't go all the way back to your reliability strategies on your equipment and see how it actually impacts your facility and its production, then what you will do will be temporary. So think of this as a journey. As they say, sometimes it's a marathon and not a sprint, but keep that in mind as well. And you have to prioritize what you do. If you go off of mandates, and you don't go off of true risk and understand the risk of what we do, then we will be making decisions that are not also long-term as well. Over the very, very important part of what we do is in a relationship standpoint, go look throughout your organization, work with your business folks, find out what you can do and see what flexibility you have, but also go to the folks that provide you your resources, from a labor standpoint, from a service provider standpoint, from your rentals and that sort of thing. So go back and work on those relationships as well as you go forward. Again, raise your game. Next slide, please. So as was said many, many times, if you look at the need of maintenance, if you look at the urgency of maintenance, it does go back to the reliability of your facility. And a lot of folks will sit here and say, well, I've got an old facility and therefore, we have to react and that's how we do things. But our study data shows that it's not the age of the facility that makes a difference. So that Q1 that was shown by Jeff earlier, it's got plants in there all the way till over 60 years old. It also has brand new plants in there. But guess what? Fourth quartile also has plants that are brand new and also have plants that are 60 years old. So the age of the facility should not be the driver. It really depends on what is your reliability approach and how does that look from a cost standpoint. Also think of this as a very good chance. I talked about raising your game, and what all is in that raising the game? Well, think about how can I do things better? So a lot of folks actually send everyone home during this time of pandemic, and as they bring people back, it is a great time to reassess where you are. Think of it as a clean slate, but especially in the area of planning and scheduling. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more with the graph that's coming up. But these are key. They're key for sustainability, it's key for savings, it's actually key for reliability as well. And also, you may want to think about this too. If you actually shut your plant down or even a part of your plant down, or if you've been doing routine maintenance on things and now you're not doing routine maintenance on things, please, from a safety standpoint, from a process safety standpoint, think about what's left in your facility and think about that as you go to start it back up again. Even pull out your old playbooks from your turnarounds and see what do you do as you actually recommission your plant and bring it back up again. So next slide, please. So I know that some of these slides are a little bit busy, but again, think about the categories we talked about. Your work process discipline, eliminating your waste, and then raising your game. And in this case, this slide touches actually on all of those different areas as we look forward. On the first one, especially on raising your game and applying work process discipline. As I said, when you change your culture, it really is free. And my goodness, if you within your own company or on the internet, associations you're dealing with, it's amazing the number of folks out there will help show you a different approach and even a different vernacular. So if you change your words on how you approach things, if you change your attitude on how you look at these things, you will move the needle for your organization. And especially from a leadership standpoint, when you do this, when you go hand in hand with operations, when you look at your production planning folks, work with them in that area. On the optimization of the planning, scheduling, and coordination, one of the key components of this is if you do not plan and schedule and coordinate and adhere to your schedule, it will cost you by statistics 6 to 9 times more than if you do it in a planned fashion. So think about that. I mean, the precious resources that we have, if we do not have the discipline of reducing our emergency work, if we don't have the discipline of planning and scheduling, we will be paying more for what we do. And again, there's always a reason, there's always a culture that's in place, and those are things that you can go work on. And again, those things do not cost you anything at all. But also, one of the things you may want to think about is every year most companies go through budgeting process, and most companies even use it's called zero-based budgeting. When you look at that zero-based budgeting and you look at what is important to us, and then look at all the charges that you have. And I can tell you a little bit of story that I had. My first maintenance leadership job, it was me and a highlighter and a very large stack of papers that came out of our cost accounting system. And that highlighter, I marked every last thing, I understood every one of the charges that came in. And I chased down every one of those charges. And the first year was an easy 10% less on my maintenance because I did not want to get charged for the things that I did not need. And over the next 2 years, I was able to reduce another 10% each of the following years because it takes time. And one of the things that our clients are telling us right now is they even ask us, what can my folks do when they're at home? Well, it's very easy to dig into your accounting system, into your CMMS system, and go find those things. Make it part of everyone's job to eliminate the waste. So just like everyone's job is to make sure they do things safely, make sure they do things from a reliability standpoint, make sure that they have an eye on efficiency, and make sure that every one of your dollars or euros or wherever you live, everything that you have counts. This applies to spare parts, it applies to services, it applies to everything that you do and everything that you work on. So make this part of your game. A very, very easy way to do this as well is make it part of the metrics of your organization, of your facility, and you review these on a periodic basis. I'd also even, if you have a big enough area to go ahead and write charters and track those and make project managers for each of the charters and have folks have the ownership in that particular area. Next slide, please. All right, so you've seen this slide before, and we're going to look at it in a little bit different fashion and form, is that our Q1 performers, our quartile 1 performers, and I've had folks ask me this too, well, what does a quartile 1 make? Well, it's statistically a fourth of all of the participants in the study. What do they do differently? And if you look at this graph, the planning, scheduling, and the completion to schedule, it tells you that is work process discipline. Okay, so what does it buy you? And on a previous webinar, I got asked a question on the panel is, well, how much more does it help the stakeholders? And it is a clear 8% versus your PRV on payback per year between Q4 and Q1. So if you have a $100 million facility, if you have a $1 billion facility, you can apply that 8% statistically to your bottom line. So if you don't think that planning, scheduling, and completing the schedule pays, I promise you our data shows that it really, really does pay as well. One of the key concepts here that I want to put in place is that you really have to run your work through either what's called a gatekeeper or an operations rep, a particular person who basically has the funnel or the flow of work. So they set priorities, they make sure what's being done is going to benefit operations. So if you do not have that concept in place, please look at that as one of your options, is to put a gatekeeper in place for each of your facility to make sure that you're on top of things and that you're following the disciplines that you need to follow. So that's just one of the things that our best performers do, is they have the right controls, they have the right people in place, they are trained, and they follow their metrics as they go forward. Next slide, please. So over the years, 25 years, we look at our best performers and we think, okay, what are they doing differently than other folks? They have very clear objectives. They focus on reliability. They're very aggressive on their planning, on their asset integrity programs. They do not get surprised. I mean, they are on top of things. They are very, very proactive. So what are the things that cut into your proactiveness, think about that as well. When they do have something that happens, and you saw before you had something that said, a line item that said, hey, you find small and fix small. Well, guess what? When you're doing your level of investigations, not just on the big events that really take you down for days on end, if you're doing your root cause analysis on events that are smaller so that you understand what the issues are before they become bigger, you are being proactive at that standpoint as well. And then relentless eliminate work efficiencies and work demand as well. Next slide, please. So your people are actually your greatest asset. Your facilities, they run, they make you your money, that sort of thing, but your people, they run them, they maintain them, they have the vision, they do the things that are in place. So take this time for training. Okay, you think about raising your game. The best athletes in the world never stop training. Not one of them ever stops training, and they keep getting better and better. And a lot of times their competition is getting better and better. So please look at your people, look at their skills, take this opportunity to raise their game as you go forward. Look at your work process discipline, as we talked about before, your proactive maintenance in your strategies, use your language of reliability, and always, always look at your risk and calculate your risk if at all possible. So as we said, if you're not getting better, then you're probably getting caught up with or getting worse from the competition. This is data that shows from 2011 to 2018, our clients over time to be in the first quartile. If you look on the left, that is your maintenance cost index, and on the right is the value of lost production. So although the value of lost production has gotten slightly better over time, the total maintenance cost for these facilities has actually gone down significantly. So therefore, someone in 2011 who was in the first quartile, or even in 2013, they may not be in the first quartile anymore. So think about that from a continuous improvement process. And a quick reminder, look at your work process discipline, apply the work process discipline, eliminate your waste, and then raise your game. With that, I thank you for your time and your questions that will be coming up here shortly. I'll turn it back over to Jeff Dudley. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to provide a quick summary, and then, as I said, after the summary, we will answer your questions. You've seen this before, but the inverted C is the only sustainable path. If you truly want to sustainably reduce your costs, you must focus on improving effectiveness. The only two levers that you have in order to improve effectiveness is through targeted spending, doing the right work the right way, and creating, as Ron mentioned, a very proactive culture. Allow your improved effectiveness to improve your efficiency. Remember, this is not opinion-based. This is based on 25+ years of data. And that data tells us that Q1 performers focus first on effectiveness, and they drive their RAM effectiveness index by first working to improve their mechanical availability and then allowing that to lower their cost. Arbitrary and blanket cost cutting takes little thought or creativity. And while it may be immediate and it may have short-term impact, it will have longer negative impact. If improving your effectiveness, you can allow yourself to actually improve your reliability and improve your profitability. Reliability is the only strategy that is able to shield itself from any economy. No matter what the economy, reliability will be the best path. Finally, I would like you to think about three things. We are in a unique period of time today. unlike any that we have seen, but not so much an economic issue, but a socioeconomic issue. So you need to think about what will change. How will you do your work? Should you take advantage of this disruption to do things differently? How can you become more proactive? How can you do the right work the right way? Can we make a conscious effort to find small and fix small? Can we find ways to eliminate waste? Can we continue to stop doing things that we have stopped over the past few months because no one noticed that we had stopped? Don't start those back up again and continue not to do that work. And can you change your focus to reliability? And you will know you have changed your focus if that is what you talk about. And if you talk about reliability, talk about it all the time. These are the questions you must ask yourself. We know that many of you are under a tremendous amount of pressure to reduce spending. And in some cases, you may even think it's a terms for survival. But now you know a different way. You know a way to reduce spending by not simply cutting costs, but focusing on reliability. Focus on improving mechanical availability to drive optimum cost. What targeted spending needs to be done so that the issues can be resolved permanently? How will you behave differently? Will you stop doing emergency work and calling it emergency work simply to get it done quickly? Will you begin to plan, schedule, and complete the plan? Will you reduce your spending in a sustainable fashion by focusing on improved mechanical availability? And finally, and most importantly, what will you change tomorrow? Based on this webinar, what have you learned that you will do differently tomorrow? Because as the saying says, if you don't do anything differently, nothing will change. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this webinar. As I said, if there are other topics you would like to see potentially in a webinar, or there are questions you have, or if Solomon can help you in any way on any project, please contact us at solomononline.com/ram, or the email that you see, experts@solomononline.com. We appreciate your participation and hope that you have a great day.